We hear a lot of perspectives on the Mankind podcast. Inclusion of a guest is not an endorsement of their views, and the opinions expressed here do not always represent the mission or values of the Mankind Project USA.
Looks like the rain has gone.
Welcome to the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove there's more than just one way to be a man. I'm going to leave that in there. I'm your host, Brandon Clift, and if this is your first time joining us, this is the show where men get to take their masks off and have some real conversations, have some tough conversations. But really, it's a place where men can come to get away from the media's magnifying glass. I know these days it can be challenging and it can be scary for a lot of people, especially a lot of men out there with how fast the world is changing, how fast the awareness around certain challenges are coming to the surface. And a lot of us men might be finding ourselves feeling inadvertently complicit to some of the problems that we're facing today. And there are those of us who don't feel complicit, who don't feel to blame. And, that's all okay. Because what we encourage here is that each individual takes their own ownership for what they can own in their lives. And perhaps you might have a blind spot that you're not privy to, but maybe through these conversations that we have through our guests, you might be able to uncover those blind spots so that you can become the man that you want to be in this world and become an agent of change to see the world change in the way that you believe it should, whether I think it's right or wrong. Are you in integrity with your mission? That's really what it's all about. And so today's episode, I have been dying to release this episode. This is one from the vault, actually, from last year, with a fellow Aussie, Dion Leonard, extreme ultra runner, dog dad, best-selling author, now living in the United States with his wife Lucia, their cat, and of course Gobi. Now, if you guys haven't heard of the story of Gobi or read the book Finding Gobi, it's a remarkable tale of a 250-kilometer extreme ultra race that Dion was a part of in the Gobi Desert in China, where he came across this scruffy little four-legged that followed him for a humongous part of that journey. I'm not going to spoil anything because the book itself is amazing, both available in paperback and audiobook. Check it out. Links will be in the show notes. But you're going to hear a story of a guy who was once a pack-a-day smoker, a heavy drinker, and through a drunken bet from one of his mates, he did his first ever 10K. And a passion was sparked. It was born. And now Dion is regarded as one of the greatest extreme ultra runners in the world. Now, you're going to be impressed by not just where he is now, but his upbringing. In fact, losing his, who he thought was his biological father, losing him at a young age, losing that kind of male role model to help guide him through life. Dion definitely found himself going through down a couple holes and different various paths that had him destined to essentially stay in his small town where he was born. But, there was something inside of him that knew he needed to get away from that. And so this episode, I believe you're going to love if you have naysayers in your life, if you have people that you don't feel like are on the bandwagon of supporting you towards your dreams. And it's also a great show if you're looking to prove something to yourself. But more than anything, I think if you're listening to the show, you probably love a true underdog story. So I'm going to shut up now. I'm going to let you guys get to this interview with extreme ultra runner, best-selling author, and dog dad, Dion Leonard. Enjoy. Mate, take it away. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll dig in.
Well, firstly, thanks so much for having us on the show. Gobi's super excited to be here, of course, sharing, our amazing true story and incredible journey that happened to us as I was running a race across the Gobi Desert, and these two sort of lives connected. And, little did we know when we met, that sort of connection would change both our lives forever as well. So pretty amazing journey and story in itself, but one that's come from a really sort of unique, difficult, tough sort of life and upbringing, I guess, that I've had as well to meet Gobi along the way. So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, awesome, mate. Well, thanks for joining us, mate. It's been a wild journey. Having read your book and heard, at first I was thinking, it's a story. It's a cute dog on a cover. We have there's always these stories that we see in movies. The one with Richard Gere, I think, with the dogs coming home, and I was thinking this is going to be great, but it's just going to be like another one of those dog stories, those cute dog stories. And oh mate, 15 minutes in, I was just like, whoa, this isn't just a story about a dog, mate. You're an impressive dude.
Well, the reason they put Gobi on the cover is because she's much better looking than I am. The publishers actually said to me, look, we've got to take control here and put Gobi on the cover. I'm sorry, you're not getting a gig for that. So, I had to sort of swallow that and just sort of be like, okay, this is about Gobi's story as well. So, but yeah, it is very much more than just a dog story. It's very much about my own story, very much about, heartbreak and despair, depression, many things that, have happened to me throughout my life that got me to that moment to be in the desert to connect with her. So, it's a real roller coaster ride of emotions in the book.
Oh, tell me about it. I was actually listening. There we go. I was just listening to it when I was driving through Oregon, down to Southern Oregon, and it just, I remember the exact moment. I was driving right past Mount Hood, which is just about an hour away from the Columbia River Gorge, and it was just at the part of the story where you were getting into the night where you lost Gary. And so, mate, tell us a little bit about that, because I believe that it's that moment that kind of sets up the rest of your story, because prior to Gary passing, it's just a regular upbringing in the bush. So take it away.
Yeah. And, as a 10-year-old boy growing up in a small country town in Australia, in Queensland, in fact, and, my life changed on a dime pretty much automatically. My father, or the man that I thought at the time was my father, Gary, he died during the evening, and it was under sort of extreme sort of circumstances. It was the day after my birthday, and we'd been having a great sort of day together, playing cricket as you do in Australia, spending time together, father and son. My mother was out for the evening, and we went to bed, probably 9 o'clock-ish, went to bed, and I went to sleep, and I could hear him during the night sort of yelling out to me, saying, yelling out my name. And he just continually kept yelling out, Dion, Dion, Dion. And the groaning and the moaning sort of made me think, oh my goodness, I've got to get up and see. But it took me quite a while to actually get to that point of going out there to see him, and to see that he was having quite a serious asthma attack. And it was at that moment then that I had to sort of race to get help. And my grandmother was actually living downstairs in a granny flat at the time. So I ran down to her and got her to come up. And she was an ex-nurse. And she sort of, had that control and that sort of calmness about her to deal with it and to take over from me. But the shock of seeing this man sort of dying in my eyes in front of me was, of course, as a 10-year-old boy, pretty heartbreaking. She rang the ambulance, and the ambulance came out, and I remember them coming through our house with the trolley to get him on that and to take him back out and to take him to hospital. And the sounds of that sort of trolley sort of making that, as the wheels turning, that sort of squeaking and groaning noise still resonates in my ears as I tell you the story now. Yeah. And that sort of really forms a big part of sort of my journey, because after he passes away in the evening, the family life disintegrates massively, and my life takes a considerable turn for the worst in so many different ways. But that moment, was such a life-changing moment. But as a 10-year-old boy, I mean, I was gutted, I was heartbroken, I was devastated. And then to be told in the days afterwards that the man that I thought was my father wasn't my father indeed, just sort of threw my own sort of life into even more turmoil, as you could imagine. So sharing that with the readers is really important, because it sets the tone of the sort of difficult, depressive and abusive life that would come from that moment onwards, that would lead me to make decisions that I have made in my life from then on.
Yeah. And we see this a lot in the work we do with the Mankind Project, is the impact on boys and young men growing up in a single parent household. And I love how you tell the story of your mum's coping. I don't want to say coping, because it sounded like she was really challenged through the period, almost lost a part of herself in the moment. And
For sure.
you weren't that. It seems like you and Gary he was such a pillar in your upbringing, as dad, and then not only do you lose dad, you kind of lose mum at the same time.
Yeah. And, writing this in the book is like extremely difficult to sort of share with people, but it is a big moment. And, sharing that relationship that I had with my mother after that is also, quite a big deal to do. But you're right, exactly what you said. I lost her as well, and from that moment onwards, and it's been something that she hasn't probably ever dealt with, as you could imagine, moving forward in her own life as well. Yeah. And that stigma of being, the family with just one parent back in the 80s was huge, especially in small country town Australia. I guess the town that I grew up in was a pretty sort of working class town, but it was also a little bit, I guess, if you want to sort of say a redneck town as well. Completely different today. It's actually a really lovely little town, little city, but not when I grew up. And, made it difficult to go to school and to suddenly be the outcast when everything was perfect before to, the next days and weeks and months later. And of course, I'm taking my own journey as well, trying to find out who I am and discover myself and who the heck is my real father and where do I stand in the world now, that I guess I started to separate from everything as well. Yeah. There's definitely more to it than just, I'm not the sane in all of it either. It's like there's so many different sides to the story, so many elements to it. Yeah. But of course, it's my journey as well.
What I love about the way you tell the story is it's a bird's eye view kind of story where it very much is about you, but there's so many little moving stories that are happening at the same time. Whether it's, your mate that you're flatting with when you're in high school or it is, we get a real taste and picture of what your mum's going through the process, or just what her reality looks like. Has she read it?
I don't know. I would imagine so, but that's a good question. I'm not sure, but the point of including that was never to hurt her or to put her in that position where she felt vulnerable about what I'd written. It's really to share the person that I became because of all of these things that were outside of not only my control, but her control as well. So, which is something that you can look back on life and actually appreciate a little bit more what she was going through as well. Of course, at the time as a 10-year-old boy, you don't have that thought process in mind.
No, because as a 10-year-old boy, you're thinking, this is the woman that feeds me, that clothes me, that keeps me safe. And that safety was, Gary and your mum, and now it's just her. And then all of a sudden what she goes through. And I mean, the thing that saddened me was obviously in the 80s in a redneck town, for all those non-Australians listening right now, that's what we refer to as a bogan town. In the 80s, especially with the stigma associated with single parent families, how that it actually ostracized you from your mates too, and the people that you're going to hang out with, because they're thinking, oh, well, here's this young kid who's lost this pillar, this role model, this male figure in his life. He's just trouble, and it only just cast you out further.
Yeah, yeah. I guess I was sort of digging my own grave in many ways, but that difficultness, that sort of feeling left out of everything, makes you probably do different things as well, be a different person, go off on different tracks as well. And it's very hard to stay on the track that you probably want to stay on, because you then start to try and impress others, or you start going down wayward tracks, I guess, of things that you probably shouldn't be doing. So, there's definitely moments of that in my life where I've been tested to go down those tracks as well. But I think it's really sort of, when you're growing up, that was really hard to deal with, because you really are reaching out for support. You're reaching out for someone to help and to guide you. And without that, if you haven't got the strength to be able to get through it yourself, you haven't got your sort of thoughts on where you want to go in life, there's a lot of dark alleyways to go down.
It's almost a sense of identity. It's like, who am I among this? I have mum and dad biologically 50-50, but of course in the case it was different. So it's trying to find, well, who am I among this picture? And did you raise those questions just as a young boy, did you raise those questions going, well, I've only known Gary as dad. Did you start to question how much of him was in you at that time? Like that you were taken with you, or was it just a case of, well, I guess he's not dad, so he's not me and I'm not like him?
No, I think I always thought that, I was still his son. I'd certainly have a lot of things, even to this day, of things that I like. Something like motorsport is one thing. He was like a V8 sort of supercar fanatic, and
Ford or Holden.
Holden, of course.
Oh.
Peter Brock fan.
Peter Brock, of course.
Peter Brock, Larry Perkins, Dick Johnson, Alan Moffat, all of these sort of
Classics.
stars back in the 80s. All of those things still sort of really resonate with me to this day, and I have little bits of that in me from him. Still certainly got something out of that sort of relationship, and unfortunately you can't remember as much as you'd like to, which is always the thing that you regret. But the sort of the moments after that, I left home at the age of 13, 14, started venturing out more and more, and lived everywhere from in someone's shed for some time, caravans, hostels, pubs, some really, really terrible accommodation, to try and put myself through school and to have to go out and get a job and to try and make ends meet, while still having this charade, if you like, of going to school and I'm still living at home and of course I'm not at this stage because it's, the relationships deteriorate so badly. So, those are the moments when you started to think, where is life going to take me?
Yeah. Well, mate, I'm excited to start chatting about that transition of how you got into to running and how that led on to racing and then ultra running and then extreme ultra, which not a lot of people are aware that there's actually something more extreme than ultra. But before we do that, I want to ask you, the man you are today, in the book you talk about all the different phases and the different kind of lenses in which you saw the world. Let's just say that it transformed, it changed through each new experience. What is something that Gary's left with you that you still like, whether it's your personality, mannerisms, or idiosyncrasies? What's something that you've kept today that little 10-year-old Dion had with him too?
Well, probably adventure. The guy was like incredible on a motorbike. He'd ridden through the Simpson Desert and broken a record through there, and he'd won like motocross awards throughout Australia. As I mentioned earlier, he loved cars and motorsport and those things. And it's probably the adventure, the want to get out and to do something and to see the country and to see the world as well. So, he never traveled outside of Australia. You got to remember 70s and 80s travel is completely different to today, especially from Australia. But I think adventure and travel is probably where I get that from him. That's a really great question and really difficult to sort of pinpoint what traits I would have without having to probably ask my mother that. But those little things are something that definitely stick with me. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Well, speaking of adventure, let's go to the beginning, right? So you've met your beautiful, then girlfriend, I guess, Lucia, or wife actually, when you were like professionally getting into the professional space, mid-20s, mover and shaker, kind of making a name for yourself. Forgive me if I can't remember the industry, but kind of set the scene for what your mid-20s look like, because you're talking before about these different kind of masks, as I would call them. Yeah, tell me about like the kind of like the world from the lens of Dion in his mid-20s.
Well, there's probably a little bit just before I met Lucia, which is a really critical part that's not in the book, which is me sort of finishing school, but not knowing where to go next, not having any money, not really being able to afford to go to university, certainly not being able to move to Brisbane closest city to go to university and pay for that. So I ended up doing what everyone does in this small country town, and that is going to work in the local abattoir, the meatworks. And this is a pretty much considered, I guess a job that's, I don't want to say sort of dead end job, but it's the job that you're probably going to do for the next 20, 30, 50 years of your life. And I actually used to go out with a girl, and her father had worked there for 50 years. His own father had died. And when he was a boy, and he was a really smart guy, and he did what he had to do, was go to the meatworks, get a job. And he created his own family, and he never had the opportunity to sort of go on and study and do the things he wanted to do. And I take my hat off to him to be that man to go and do that. So, I'm certainly not having a go at the role in the industry and those things. But for me, as that boy that sort of had this higher hope and future in my head, but everyone else had written me off to do absolutely nothing with my life, I was fully expected to go to the meatworks. I mean, I was very lucky to actually probably even get through the schooling that I had. So, the testament and drive to do that was one thing that was really burning inside me. And then to end up there, and I think I worked there for about 2 or 3 years. And this is a job where you go to work, you do your 10, 12-hour shift a day, you go home, you're going straight to the pub either before work or after work. The weekends are full of, shooting, drinking, going out, riding motorbikes. That's the lifestyle, and drugs, smoking. I mean, it's just, I'm not saying everyone does that, but this is the sort of lifestyle that was sort of happening around me when I was there. So I knew, when I was there, I knew from the day I started, every day was being lost in my life, during this time that I was there. So I started to put money away, started to skip out of some of those Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday sessions, and started saving some money. And then I had this sports car, and, I was kind of living a little bit of it. But on the other side, I was actually trying to plan a future as well. And I remember putting all of the money away. And one day I actually resigned from the meatworks and told everyone that I was going to go off and do further education. So I guess a little bit like college in Australia, we call it TAFE. And it was enough to be able to go for a year or two, do a diploma where I could get enough sort of qualifications to be able to enter university properly. And every single person laughed me out of the meatworks. Every single friend that I might have made there that was around them said, "There's no way you'll make this work. You'll be back," was one of the comments that I remember still to this day from a woman who said that you're a loser. You can't leave the meatworks. You're never going to make anything of yourself. So I went then and left the meatworks, did the course at the TAFE at the college, got in.
Just quickly, Dion, sorry to break the flow, but what happened to you in that exact moment when she said, "You're a loser, you're going to end up back here"? What was the internal dialogue? Was it Yeah.
The internal dialogue was absolutely that. Anger, frustration, something that had happened from the age of, Gary dying to that moment, entirely continuously. Every single moment was someone knocking me down, saying you were never going to do it, you could never make it. So that was just the drive. That was the drive. It's like the fuel that you're pouring into the V8. It's something that I controlled myself really well at that point. And I remember just walking out and not saying anything, negatively or swearing or anything. And I just thought, I'm going to use this. And I've used that in my head before I go out to present to maybe 1,000 people at a conference. I use those sort of words to go, remember that, remember who you are and where you've come from. And, I went on and completed that course, went into university, and my life just went on a completely different tangent, and I never went back.
Mm.
If you're enjoying the Mankind podcast, how about taking another step? Now, this one takes some courage, and you have it. Come check out the Men's Work Introduction. It's 3 sessions over 3 weeks. New sessions start every month, where you can join other men on the path. Go to themenswork.org.
so many people talk about their small town upbringings and the kind of the vacuum that can be created in those smaller communities. Now, having traveled all over America multiple times back and forth, those smaller communities, there's such a magic to them. I love them. I mean, I've driven out back in Australia, I've driven out to Emerald and spent a lot of time in Tamworth and these kind of, smaller towns that there is a magic to them, but there is also that kind of vacuum element of people don't leave here.
Yeah. And
it's tough.
It's funny, and I don't know if it's just Australians, but it's kind of like we don't want you to do well, but in a way we kind of do.
Tall poppy syndrome.
Exactly.
Tall poppy syndrome. For those listening, it's an Australian phrase. Poppies are a long stem flower, and if you're farming them, one grows tall, you have to trim it to make sure they all stay the same height. And it is, I mean, it's everywhere in the world, but I believe that, look at In Excess. You might remember In Excess in the 80s. In 85, they were the biggest band in the world, and all you heard in the newspapers was In Excess forgets their roots. In Excess forgets where they've come from. And sorry to jump on this. I'm just so passionate about this that so many people have their light, their fire, the thing that makes them unique, special, their magic, the thing that could take them anywhere in the world to leave their small country towns, gets doused by all the people around them that are so uncomfortable with that growth. They're so uncomfortable with the idea of you going somewhere and me staying here. So I may as well talk you down. I may as well talk you down from jumping and making that leap to whatever potential there is. And if you make the leap and fail, I'm going to make it so painful.
Absolutely.
So that you never try again.
Yeah. It's because they feel awkward. It's because they feel, insignificant or out of control of what they're, able to do as well. And, Australians are fantastic at actually digging deep and helping each other and that sort of Anzac spirit. And it's really weird that we have this sort of other corresponding issue. Yeah.
It's a dichotomy. It's one of those countries. It's like our overarching belief system is you help a mate, mates for mates.
Yep.
Like that's just what we do. But when it comes to just growth or expression or putting ourselves out there, you notice the difference when you're in America. Someone saves little Timmy from a well and there's a billboard.
Absolutely. Yeah. They're all over it. And, it is completely different, but, it's also sometimes it is very grounding and it is kind of good as well. So
totally.
I wouldn't change it for the world either. That's for sure.
Yeah, because it sounds like it was the exact rubber band you needed to just kind of like snap you out of there to go, you know what, I'm going to push against this resistance and find something different than what everyone else thinks I'm going to follow, right?
And fast forwarding through that sort of university, getting some work, I managed some gas stations, some service stations, a group of those for a little while, and then I ended up getting a job that would sort of get me into sales and marketing. And it was my first real step. And it was a connection with someone that had worked with me previously that had moved on. And it was my first real understanding of people can take you anywhere, and relationships is so important, probably more important than any sort of university degree for a majority of things in life that you're probably not always necessarily told. And for me, like, it was that sort of moment of learning to trust people, learning for that people can do wonderful things for you and take you to sort of wonderful sort of things in your life, whether it's business life or personal life, etc. But he was a great mentor for me, and it put in some really sort of important pillars into my learning how to sell and the sales sort of steps of the ladder of sales and all those things that you start out learning. And one of those things that you still, I took with over 20 years of sales and marketing experience, it would take me from the ground up to senior executive level roles throughout New Zealand, the UK and Europe as well.
Mm. And so here we are now. What, your mid-20s when this is occurring?
Mid-20s into the 30s, yeah.
Into the 30s, right. So a real tipping point. It's one of the man switches that some people talk about, where we go from kind of that rootin', drinking, drugging phase. For the non-Aussies listening, rooting in Australia means having sex. But it's that 20s kind of going crazy. But now we're getting into the 30s. We're starting to tip the curve of, okay, find the person that we're going to spend the life with, and let's put some roots down. And tell me just quickly how Lucia came into your life, and then the influence that she had on you to look at things a bit differently, especially around running.
Yeah, well, it's been a massive part of my life, and we've been together like nearly 22 years, I think now. And it all started from a blind date, and someone that used to work for me lived with Lucia, and she set us up. So little did we know when we went out to this little country pub for a sort of evening meal, and the romance would blossom and things would take us, on that journey.
Yeah.
But we, when we sort of connected, I guess I was still looking for a lot of things in my own sort of personal life, love and happiness and joy, I guess, those sorts of things that had been really missing since, 10-year-old boy. So, I'd had the wild times and things, but they never sort of fulfilled that at any moment. So meeting Lucia and having that relationship with her actually took us into more, I guess, eating and drinking and sort of wanting to sort of look after each other and be there for each other and sort of give each other those things that we actually both like ballooned, weight-wise, health-wise, fitness-wise. And I was over 250 pounds at one point. So, that at that moment in my sort of 30s, you could imagine a pretty fat lad who would never, ever have imagined of running around the block, let alone an ultra marathon.
And thank goodness, if it wasn't for your mate that was preparing for a 10K.
Yeah.
You guys laid a bit of a cheeky bet. He'd been training 6 months?
He'd definitely been training. He'd done the race before. He was in much better shape than I was. And he had actually had been overweight previously as well, and used running as that sort of reason to get fit. And our local half marathon actually, what is that, 21 Ks, so 13 miles, it was on, and we were drunk. It was his 30th birthday. His name's Dan. And he said, he's going to go out and do this race. And he wanted to beat his time of about 1 hour 50 from the year before. And I was pretty soaked with alcohol at this time. I was early into the morning. And I sort of piped up and said, you know what, I think I can do this as well. And we have some amazing friends, people that we've known for quite a long time in Manchester and England. And they were all sort of around listening to this conversation spiral out of control. But they also laughed and they, a couple of them said, there's no way you can do this. And inside of me, the light just flickered again, and the fire sort of was in my belly. And
that's the key.
Yeah, that was the moment. That was the moment. And I said, I bloody well can, that I'm going to do it. I bet you that I can do it. And, I was so drunk, in fact, that I said to my mate Dan, I said, I'll give you 5 minutes head start for the race as well. And everyone was just rolling around the ground laughing.
Oh, this guy's bold.
And it doesn't say it in the book, but actually at that party, because his name was Dan, he had to come as something dressed as with the letter D, starting with the letter D. And I came dressed as Dame Edna. You remember Dame Edna? Great. Yeah.
Famous comedian, drag, from the 60s all the way up. Yeah.
Yes. So I had this big wig on. She always had these fancy glasses, if you remember.
Hello, Poppet.
Exactly. Had the makeup on, everything. Yeah. And I walked into the party and everyone was just in stitches. I'm the last person I guess they would have ever thought come dressed as Dame Edna. So I'm trying to tell these people I can win this race, I can do this, I can finish it, and I can beat my mate dressed as Dame Edna as well.
Brilliant. That's
and it was a big deal. The bet, if you lost the bet, you had to take out the other person and wife for dinner. So, I was still a big lad. If I won the bet, Dan, it was going to cost Dan quite a lot of money to take me and Lucia out for dinner as well, So the competition was on, and by morning though, I'd forgotten about it. I was hungover. Yeah, I was probably reaching for Bloody Mary or something, and my wife says to me, I think you better lay off the alcohol today and start thinking about the half marathon that you bet with Dan, because it's only in 10 weeks time and you better start getting ready. So that was the shock of like, holy hell, what have I done, you know?
Wow. Well, I don't want to spoil the book, because the chapters between right then and that moment where you made the bet to, you know, one of your first ultras is probably one of my favorite periods of the book. And not to mention, I mean, later in the book when I'm getting sweaty and anxious hearing about everything you dealt with in China with Gobi. And so I'll leave that to the listeners to go get the book and check it out. It's on Audible as well, which is fantastic. So I love when I hear about these little moments. There's little moments in time that it's a seed planted, or it's just a half a degree change of direction that opens up a whole new world, a whole new possibility. And I want to just share how cool it is that you and I are having this conversation. Whereas before I took off on my little van life journey in the past 2 and a bit months, I was going through one of those kind of quick lube. You drive through, you get your oil changed, you don't have to get out of the car. And the guy comes over and wants some details for my car. And he's like, "Are you Australian?" Obviously had a very thick Tennessee accent. I won't do it. He goes, "Are you Australian?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Oh man, we had this guy come in yesterday from Australia. He's like a big runner." And I'm like, "Oh, no way. That's pretty cool. I've met a ton of Aussies in Tennessee, even Chattanooga." And I'm like, "That's cool. That's always cool to know that people make it across the pond to Chattanooga of all places." And he goes, "Yeah." And he's telling me about, he had this dog and he did this like race where he like, this dog in China followed him for like, I don't know, like 800 miles or something. And he's telling me the story. And I was like, this is pretty cool. Like, he came in yesterday. There's an Aussie who's this trail, and I'm a trail runner too. So it sparked my interest. And before my oil had been changed in my car, I'd found Dion, shot him a message. I said, "Here's what we do at the Mankind Project. Here's what we do on the show. Would love to chat to you." And this, because this is just cool. I didn't even know the story. I hadn't even read the book yet. Committed to read the book in that moment. And he got back to me and he was like, "Yeah, let's set it up." In East Tennessee, I went through a drive-through, oil change. I get told about this Aussie bloke who found a dog in China who ran 800 miles with him. Not 800, but yeah, Dion will tell you.
I should have got him to write the book, you know.
Should have got him to write the book. Yeah, exactly. The fish was this big.
Yeah.
And then next thing you know, here we are having this conversation. It's just so cool, these little moments. And so that night where you were just absolutely sloshed, dressed up as National Treasure Dame Judi Dench. No, not Dame Judi Dench. Dame Edna. Sorry. Different country, different National Treasure. And you make this bet. What was the feeling when you woke up and you found out about this half marathon? Were you still as motivated as you were the night before?
Well, yeah, because, you know, when I did sort of wake up and realize like what I'd got myself into, I also remembered the fact of all of the other people around me sort of laughing and gesturing the fact that I couldn't do it. And
well, you're a big boy. Big boys don't run half marathons.
The point of wanting to prove them wrong was the fire, you know, was the thing that's always really motivated me, was to prove people wrong. For a lot of my life, like, that was my fuel. Things have changed more now, but definitely back then, that was still my fuel, is to use the sort of negativeness, use the people saying those things, doing things to you to prove them wrong. So, you know, I got my ass up and found some tennis shoes and some ill-fitting clothes and made my way out the door in Manchester. And I think it was January, sort of cold, wet, windy Manchester day, and ran around the block. Well, you know, crawled around the block, walked around the block, struggled. And that was the moment that, you know, I realized I had a lot to do and had 10 weeks to do it. So it just went from there, you know, block by block by block, became mile, 2 miles, 3 miles. And in the meantime, Dan was still out training, and he used to put it on Twitter, and Twitter was the in social media at the time. Yeah. And he used to put on there like how much training he'd done that day. And I'd purposely go out and try and do more the next day and to try and build on that. It was really spurring me on. And he'd message me on the side. He'd send me a text. He'd say, "Have you started training? Have you done anything yet?" And I'd just be like saying, "Look, dude, I'm still in the pub. I'm going to get there. Don't worry. It's all good."
Yeah.
Totally put him
Playing
off.
the bluff.
Absolutely. Massively. So
Finish
much
my
so.
beer.
Yeah. Cheers. So much so that when we got to the race day, his jaw dropped when he saw like how fit I was and how much weight I'd lost and how ready to go I was.
Oh, mate. So
an exact moment of like turning right. You briefly mentioned Gobi, which I'm sure we'll come on to, and it's a turning right moment. And my friend in Australia is just releasing a book about those sorts of moments in life that change your life forever. And they're the moments that you can possibly not take because you haven't got the courage and willingness to do it. But if you step outside that, oh my goodness, can take you into an amazing world as well.
Absolutely. Well, so you beat your mate, which was a shock to him, and I'm sure many who were at the declaration of Dion Leonard that I'm going to beat you. I'm sure it wasn't a happy meal that he took you to dinner for.
It was a good meal, to be fair to him. He stuck to his end of the bargain. We had a great evening out.
Yeah.
I made sure I still ate and drunk my way through as much as that I could. But it was really a moment of achievement, finishing that race. It wasn't really about beating him. It was really about sort of finding myself, and that finish line really helped me feel that I'd accomplished something. For the first time in a bloody long time, like I thought to myself, I've done something great. I've done something epic. What else can I go on to achieve?
Yeah, that is those little moments that, in the grand scheme of life, it's those little moments that may seem insignificant to some that are like one brick in the bridge of belief that's going to connect us to everything we're capable of. And it sounds like that was just one brick, and then it was the next race. And I want to ask you, you talk about in the book the rush that comes from coming first. And it seems like at that stage of your life, when we're doing the big ultra races, the big extreme ultras, that it was that paradigm seemed to have shifted, where you weren't operating so much on I'm going to prove them wrong. It almost seemed to be a thing of like, I'm going to prove myself right.
Yeah, but that took a long time to get to that point.
Yeah.
There was a lot of anger and I guess frustration and hurt in the basement of me that still needed to be burnt through. And those first races, those first events, and those first things I would go to, I would just be like this mental mess at the end of like an ultra marathon. Some of the ones that I'm doing go for a whole week, covering 250 kilometers, 155 miles. You're pushing yourself physically, but mentally you've got to have that drive as well. And you can really burn yourself out by just churning the same sort of negativeness, I guess, in your mind continuously. But that's what was really getting me through those early races. And it wasn't really until I found myself at the Gobi race and I found Gobi and our story connected that I found happiness and sort of joy within myself. And then I started to run to prove to me I could do things. The challenges that I do now and the events that I go to are for no one else except myself.
Yeah. Now that leads us to one of those right turns, you should say. For the sake of time, let's because I mean the whole China, it's like the first time in China, that alone is its own massive epoch of a journey, let alone when you go back to get Gobi. But as someone who has gone to great lengths for a dog that he loves deeply, having brought my dog from Australia to America, having traveled around America with him in the van, once in a Corolla, we did cross country in a Corolla, which was an interesting journey.
Nice.
Knowing that connection that comes, but that can only be experienced. It can't be explained, the relationship between a man and a dog. I want to ask you if there was one thing one thing, and I'm going to give you one word. It's going to be a challenge. One thing that Gobi has taught you ever since she came into your life that you're going to take with you for the rest of your life, what would you say that one thing is?
Kindness. Yeah. It's a big sort of thing to me that I've been able to feel about myself, but also to give to other people as well, and or animals. And if we're all kinder to each other and kinder to the world we live in, I think we're all living in a better place. And Gobi's certainly shown me that throughout everything that's happened to me with my journey with her as well.
Beautiful, Dion. Beautiful. Well, mate, I tell you, for those, I'm eating the biggest slice of humble pie, because me being the 27-year-old that I am, that has this deep-rooted belief that I know everything about the world. When I heard about this book about finding a dog, I went in going, well, you know what? I'm going to read it and listen to it. I'm very impressed by Dion's running accomplishments. That's my in. Let's see where we go with this. By the time I got to the end of that audiobook, I was just in absolute shock and awe of the journey that the three of you, I'll say, you, Gobi, and Lucia, have been on together. It's truly a one-of-a-kind kind of story.
Thanks. And it is, as you say, a journey for the three of us, perhaps four with my cat, Lara, as well.
Can't forget the cat.
Coming from the 13-year-old boy with absolutely nothing, going out onto the streets, working in the meatworks, trying to get through life. If you'd have told me back then that I'd have a New York Times bestseller, an international bestseller, book in 21 languages, potentially being made into a film, I'd never have believed it. The moment I go back to pick Gobi up throughout the race that I'm running in China changes our lives forever. It's the moment that if I don't take that opportunity, I wouldn't be here today talking to you. And that's the sort of turning right moment that really you've got to take. And you won't always get thanked for it, or you won't always have an amazing sort of outcome at the end of it. And you shouldn't look for that, but sometimes it can be pretty incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything needs to happen the way it happened to be here. So, yeah. Well, mate. So for those that are now just thinking, okay, well, what do these guys keep referencing about China and the race and, trying to get the dog? I'm telling you, you will not be disappointed. Get your hands on either a hard copy or the audiobook. It is something special. It's an awesome read. And I came away from reading it. I mean, the takeaways for me were huge. Number one, I committed to you that before I'm 30, I'm going to do a 100-mile race, which makes me want to vomit thinking about it.
Well, let's just retrace those steps. Initially, it was going to be 100 kilometers, and we upped the game, didn't we, in style to the 100 miles. Yeah.
Well, in the presence of someone who doesn't like to nibble on things, I got a wild hair and made a decision that I one day might regret. But that being said, it's going to happen, and it's going to happen in Kokoda, of all places.
Love it.
So, yeah. Oh, awesome, mate. Well, my friend, tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now in the States, because I know Australia was home, Manchester was home, Scotland was home. Now you're in the States. Tell us what you're doing.
Yeah, basically sort of out, I guess in terms of spreading the word of Finding Gobi. The book's huge in the US, comes in picture book, young readers edition, which is huge across schools. And then, of course, got the adult book as well. So it's, I talk at all different levels, from school kids, libraries, conferences, businesses, and there's many different levels of, of course, what I'm talking about. But, that's the great thing about the story with Gobi. There's so much to it. And one of the reasons why we did the children's picture book, the young readers, and the adult book is it's like there's a story for the whole family to read. And, it's heartwarming and inspiring, can take you on many different avenues as well. But then when I do the motivational speaking, the events, the conferences, I bring a lot more of the sort of sales and marketing experience with some of the biggest wine, spirits, FMCG companies that I've worked with all around the world, to my own sort of ultra running, personal life, Gobi, so many different elements that I sort of weave through it as well. And it's really created that opportunity for me to be able to be out in the US now, sharing my story and Gobi's story as well. So, alongside that, we've also got the film in sort of production as well, which has been delayed, of course, through COVID. But fingers crossed, everything goes ahead with that as well.
Absolutely, brother. Fingers and toes are crossed. Well, Dion, mate, I can say this now, having gotten to speak to you many times, including the time that we tried to go live but didn't have the internet on our favor 6 weeks ago. But I can truly bet my hat and say that you, my friend, are one very kind dude.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's been great to be on here and share my story, and I appreciate, all of the support that you put towards it as well.
This has been the Mankind Podcast, produced in association with the Mankind Project USA. I have been your host, Brandon Clift, and I personally want to thank our guests for joining us today and imparting their wisdom from their experiences in this amazing journey called life. And of course, I want to thank you, the listener, because through your attention and your support, you make it a heck of a lot easier for us to let men out there in the world know that they are not alone and that there is more than one way to be a man. Special thanks, of course, goes to my incredible team, Marketing and Communications Director Boyson Hodgson, producer and editor of this episode, Michael Russo, who makes me sound so much more intelligent than I actually am, so of course, special kudos goes there. And if you've been enjoying the music throughout this episode and all of our episodes, check out Jim, Donovan, and the Sun King Warriors. I have links to them in the show notes. Now, the fee for this episode is simple. If you found gold and insights that you believe could benefit your loved ones and those you care about, be sure to share it with them. And of course, remember that life doesn't happen to us, it happens for us, so long as we rip the pen out of fate's hand and become the author of our own story. So my friend, pick up the pen and we'll see you next week. Lots of love.